I'm a PhD student at UCL. Mm-hmm. I work with two supervisors. So my primary supervisor is Rob Palgrave, and my PhD and like his group's research is focused on new age materials. So my PhD looks at new solar cell materials. So the kind of main class of compounds there is the perovskites and their derivatives. So our group looks at studying these compounds more from like a solid state chemistry perspective rather than like an engineering perspective, which is kind of the final output of these. Mm-hmm. So rather than looking at device optimization, we kind of look at the bulk structure and try to understand sort of the inherent properties of these materials and why not they work in solar cells. And my PhD in itself is focused on making single crystals of these. And that's good because the single crystal allows us the opportunity to study the bulk. So like the big sort of matrix of a material and look at things like electronic properties. Mm-hmm. But it also is pretty cool because, as is this video, we can also study the surfaces of them because they are crystals. They have specific crystallographic surfaces, and this helps in understanding whether some surfaces are more stable or if some surfaces work better. And it's kind of important when you're looking at combining pure science with things like engineering to understand the optimization of a device in both the surface and the bulk. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of our research.
So what is it about surface science that you find particularly interesting?
So the story for this kind of starts from the person who was my secondary supervisor, so Anna Ragoots. She and her group is the Advanced X-ray Spectroscopy group at UCL. So it is in itself a very surface science heavy group. I did my undergraduate research project with her a few years ago. And the project I did then, when I didn't really know much about research and surface science in general, because you aren't really exposed to these topics early on in your undergraduate degree. It's more towards the latter half of it where you learn about such advanced characterization methods. But because of the opportunity she provided in that summer research program, I was able to learn about like radiation damage using X-ray photoemission spectroscopy. And it now covers a PhD student's topic who's done. So it was really cool to see that you can have these sort of systematic studies of materials, which not only explain the material, but then also give a lot of insight into the instruments that like most universities and industry like people use. Mm-hmm. And I think it was just really cool to see that approach be taken in the real world. I think a lot of times when you're studying stuff in undergraduate, it's really hard to see the output of it. But it was really good to see that happen kind of at an early stage in my degree as well. And I would attribute like a lot of my interest in photoemission spectroscopy to Anna, actually. But yeah, that's pretty cool.
Okay. So how is your research group balanced in terms of female ECRs?
Yeah, so the only male is my primary supervisor. But I would say it's like really important to note that while I have learned XPS and been introduced to it by women, and literally every single person in both of my groups are women who do XPS except for my primary PI, it's that I've intentionally sought out such spaces. Like to me, it's really important not just to be doing research that I'm interested in, because there's loads of groups in many institutes all over the world that have that research that happens. But it's more important to me to be in workspaces and education spaces that are sort of representing me, right? And it's one of the reasons why I approached Anna for an undergraduate summer project, because to me it was not only interesting that she was studying energy materials and like these conducting oxides and stuff, but also that she was somebody who was quite keen on making a diverse group. And so is my other supervisor as well. So it's really important for me back then as an undergraduate, but also now as like a postgraduate student to actively seek such workplaces.
Yeah. And how do you think that's affected maybe your trajectory and how much you've enjoyed your research, or maybe some opportunities that you have? Do you think that's impacted it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of spoiled me because to have such forward-thinking places is kind of like, it's almost like a little bit of a haven from what I understand is the real, the real world and how things are. Obviously, it's good in a sense that you can find these kind of places and that there are these kind of spaces that exist within like this field. But it also can be a bit of a double-edged sword in the sense that, like, if I were to leave the space, which I at some point probably would, you have to face the realities of the world, which is, that things are not so easy for women, especially as ECRs, and especially like as you progress, not just in your career, but also in your personal life. Like, I can understand there's a lot of different decisions that have to be made that might be out of your control.
Is that something that maybe intimidates or scares you when you think about your future?
I don't know if it scares me, but it definitely, I would say, is a bit, not really upsetting, but it's a bit frustrating that as a woman, these are things that I have to consider quite early on in my career compared to like a man in the same position. Because I think as a graduate student, like, sure, you're not really thinking about like your entire career trajectory, but the fact is that even something like getting into a long-term partnership would affect how my life would unfold, not just from like a work perspective or academic perspective, but also from a personal life. And I think when you speak to different people from different backgrounds, you understand that not everybody has to think about these things. But yeah, I think so in that sense, it's not really upsetting. It's just, I guess, a bit frustrating if you really were to conceptualize it.
So I've been thinking about, and I really like how you said that your research group was almost like a haven. Is there anything that you do day to day to maintain that environment for other women in your group?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's not just that they are diverse groups and that it has people from various different backgrounds, whatever that may be, but it's also that inherently everybody is a nice person, right? And I think that's in a sense where you kind of have to maintain that for the future of the group as well, because it's a research group in the sense that graduations happen, so people come and go, right? And then you go from being sort of the young start out in the group, and now like we're slowly sort of edging towards being senior PhD students. But it's also to ensure that the sort of welcoming feeling that you were given is also then translated on to the rest of the group, and the sort of harmonious research that has occurred still does continue on. Because while I don't think like, a PI is like sitting there and forcing you to have like harmonious interactions with your colleagues, but it's definitely something that they have curated by themselves, right? Because it is their research group.
And how do you feel about XPS or surface science as a career pathway for women in STEM?
I think, honestly, surface science is really cool. So we're at like this place right now, but we're also really close to the Diamond Light Source, which is it's essentially just a huge beamline, and they have all of these end stations for different characterization processes. And I've had like the sort of opportunity to be at the XPS hutch, which is IO9. So that's the hard X-ray experimental hutch. And so in a sense, like lab-based XPS is very surface sensitive. So it only goes like a few nanometers deep. Hard X-rays can go slightly more closer into the surface. So it's been really cool to see not just lab-based XPS, but also synchrotron-based XPS, and see how the versatility of just sort of one phenomena, which is the photoelectric effect, has a range of research outputs. And also, I think at synchrotrons and also just doing sort of being in an XPS heavy group on both sides is you see the versatility of research that can come through it. So because you're more focused on an analytical technique and ensuring you provide robust analysis of different systems. It opens you up, at least in the sense that you kind of become sort of a jack of all trades. That you are able to learn about different types of science because you are so focused on ensuring that they get the like sort of analytical product from you that matters or that is relevant to them. But it kind of provides you sort of a little peek at everyone else's work, which is quite nice. And you see that very, very often with synchrotron time as well, because synchrotron time is quite precious. So I think it's really cool. It's kind of like being in a library.